Well, good morning, those of you who are here with us in person and those who are joining online. Those on the East Coast, good afternoon, who are joining us online. My name is Jordan Ballor. I'm Director of Research at First Liberty's Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy, and it's my pleasure to moderate this panel discussion talking about the results and unveiling of the results of the 2024 Religious Liberty in the States Project. I'm joined by Mark David Hall, who's a professor of government at Regent University in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He's also director of the Religious Liberty in the States Project. And also Paul Mueller, who's an economist, a senior research fellow with the American Institute for Economic Research and associate director of the Religious Liberty in the States Project. So this is an annual project. We're now entering our third year. So 2024 is the third year of the Religious Liberty in the States Project. And Mark, I guess I'm going to ask you to start by giving a bit of an overview of where we're at, where we've come from, a summary of the project, and other things that everybody needs to know to get a handle on what we're doing in this RLS project.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jordan. So it's been a joy to be involved with this project for a couple of years. I want to begin by acknowledging that Dr. Sarah Estelle, an economist at Hope College, oversaw this for 2022, 2023, and she did a great job of building a project. And so Paul and I wanted to continue to build on what she has already begun, and so we did not radically depart from that. But all along, it's been the intent that we would add items that we would measure specific laws protecting religious liberty at the state level. So we began with 29, we've jumped to 34, and now we're at 39. So if we could go to the next slide. So what we do is we look at 39 specific ways that states may choose to protect or not to protect religious liberty, and then we aggregate these into 16 safeguards, which we use for the methodological reasons that you can read about on our website to rank states and compare them to one another. I'll mention just one of the items and now safeguards that we added. It follows very nicely on what Josh Blackman just said. In the wake of the pandemic, 18 states have passed laws basically prohibiting the governors of those states from treating houses of worship differently than similarly sized businesses. And so we can never have in these 18 states what we had in Nevada, where we had massive casinos open, but very large churches being limited to 50 people. So that's an example, one of the things we added, which I think gives us more robust measures of religious liberty at the state level.
So we're taking the federal context as a baseline and then looking specifically at legal safeguards that states are free to enact or not, and working out of what those states have already done. Paul, let me ask you to give a bit of a summary and overview of the data, what's interesting about what's changed from last year to this year or over the first 3 years of the project, and if there are states that have moved in the results and why they've moved.
Sure. So part of what's valuable about creating an index is that we can rank the states and get a little healthy competition going on in terms of which states are protecting religious liberty, how states can improve in protecting it. What we have here on the screen is the top 5 states from the 3 years that we've done this. And you may be surprised to see Illinois at the top there, and we'll talk about why that is a little bit later. But what you'll see is that no states are above 80%, right? There's no states that are protecting religious liberty perfectly or in every way possible here. We see states moving around a little bit. Florida has moved up. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. But we've got our top 5 states that you can look at: Illinois, Florida, Montana, Arkansas, and then Mississippi and Ohio tie for 5th place in terms of the safeguard protections that they have. Then we have sort of the bottom 5, right, the Hall of Shame here. And West Virginia, I'll highlight one thing. West Virginia is at the bottom, and it has been at the bottom. It was at the bottom last year, but it's made strides. You'll notice that last year it scored 14% on its religious liberty protections. This year it's at 25%, and we're hopeful that the legislature can enact a few more protections and it'll keep moving up there. But we've got, again, the top, the bottom. A lot of states are in the middle. They're around the sort of 50%, 40 to 50, 55%. So there's lots of room for states to continue improving on their how they protect religious liberty. The final thing I want to show you is the change. So the 3 most improved states this year are Montana, New Hampshire, and Florida. And these states saw double-digit improvements in how much they protect religious liberty. And we see that as very promising, very exciting. And we can talk about that more maybe in Q&A.
Sure. Yeah, let me follow up with you, Paul, real quick. Just can you talk a little bit about how, like, what's driving these changes? For the most part, improvements, right? But I mean, states can move up and down. How can they do that?
Right. So
Given our methodology.
So for the major changes here, it's because they've added new protections, either religious conscience protections and medical provision or religious restoration kinds of acts, other kinds of protections. But as Mark alluded to earlier, this index, part of what we're trying to do is be as comprehensive as possible and try to understand what are all the existing legal protections that states have implemented, right? So even if one state has implemented, and only one state has implemented a religious liberty protection, we include that in our index. So we're always looking for new protections. So as the index grows, state scores can change if they pass new protections, but they might also change because we're adding new kinds of protections that some states had that we just didn't record in the past. And so there's a little bit of change as we add new items, but the major improvements come about because, as these three states have done, in multiple ways, they've added new religious liberty protections in the last year.
And that's really illustrated in that case of Illinois, which has been right at the top or towards the top in each one of these first 3 years. And the overall score has changed a little bit, but it's remained towards the top. What are we to make of the case of Illinois? Mark, I know you've had a researcher who's done some digging into the history of religious liberty protections at the state level in Illinois. What does Illinois tell us as a kind of a case study, as an example, and is it a lesson for other states or for us more broadly as we look at what states can and can't do?
Thank you, Jordan. We've probably received no greater pushback for this project than the fact that Illinois is #1 in the nation. I think the logic is, well, we all know Illinois is a very progressive state. Progressives don't like religious liberty. So the fact that you rank it as #1, that shows that there's a real problem. And so one of the things we did to address this is I had a law student at Regent University, Caleb Ridings, do a deep dive on Illinois. First of all, let me mention, you can see all the check marks. These laws are in place, and many of them are very specific protections. Some laws, there's some subjectivity, like a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which Illinois does have, but others. Is a minister, a priest, or a imam protected from having to violate the seal of the confession? That's in place, and I would challenge anyone to find instances where that has not been respected in Illinois. Same with an exemption to a vaccine requirement before you can attend public school and that sort of thing. So we can look at these protections, but I think if you look at where they come from, almost all of them are adopted between 1934 and 1998. So this is back in the day. It's hard to remember, but Illinois used to be a conservative state. Something like 8 of 10 presidential elections between 1952 and 1988 were won by Republicans. It was very common to have the Republicans control both the House and the Senate. And not only that, but those were back in the good old days where you had conservative rural Democrats and urban Catholic Democrats who were able to come together and build a coalition to protect religious liberty. And I think that's the most important lesson that we can pull from this. Back when it was possible to pass religious liberty protections, Illinois passed them. Illinois would never pass most of these in the 21st century, but once a law is in place, it's hard to remove that law. So Paul and I had an essay come out in Law and Liberty just this morning comparing Illinois and Colorado in this respect. Colorado was far more conservative than Illinois in the late 20th century. Colorado didn't bother to pass religious liberty protections, and so today Colorado is 43rd in the nation. It does horrendously on this. And so this is a real lesson for conservative states today. States where you might think, well, in Wyoming, it's maybe not necessary to have religious liberty protection. Well, maybe it's not as necessary right now, but it would sure be a good idea to pass these protections while it's possible so that they're in place 40 years from now when perhaps Wyoming won't be quite as conservative.
And so as we add new items, if Illinois continues to be inactive, for example, in adding things, they'll change, their scores will change only if they've already got what we've discovered or we found or something like that, or their score will go down if they don't have the new things that we discovered. Another aspect of that I think is interesting is it gets at exactly what we're measuring, right? We're looking at laws that are on the books, either in constitutions or in statutes, and not about a broader experience of religious liberty perhaps in the state. So these are things that are actionable perhaps in a law court that you can have a defense for your free exercise rights and point to the state law as providing that protection. But it doesn't speak to the lived experience directly in the same way that you might experience if you were a resident of Chicago or something like that, right? So we're not looking at what local governments are doing, or other kinds of cultural factors, you could say. We're looking at the law specifically in this measure. Paul, can I ask you to say a little bit more about the structure of the data? So we've got 39 protections now, or specific items that we're looking at across, organized into these 16 safeguards. Can you talk a little bit about what's most common, what we find in many states, and then what ones are the least common or the most rare kinds of protections?
Sure. So let me just say one more thing on what you were saying, just to emphasize this project it really is an index of religious protections that are on the book. So it's not exactly a measure of the climate of religious liberty in a state, right? And so Illinois scores high on protections on the books, even though it might not feel like a very friendly kind of state. And what we're encouraging legislators and people to do is that in places that feel very friendly to religious liberty, let's make sure that there are actually legislative protections that match that friendliness to religious liberty. And so that's what we're doing here. So in terms of the structure of the data, I'm happy to talk afterwards. It's a big spreadsheet. You can download it online. I'm happy to talk in more detail about the ins and outs. But there's 39 different items, discrete things that we look at. And then we lump those into 16 safeguards or categories, because many of the items are very similar. So for example, for medical providers to not provide abortion, we have private hospitals, public hospitals, cases of emergency. So there's 7 different items related to protecting medical practitioners when it comes to abortion, but that's just under one safeguard. We kind of lump those together because they're so closely related. So the index score is based on how many of the safeguards states have. So it's these 16 safeguards that are here. But I'll show you here the variation. These are items, so of the 39, these are items here. Some are very, very widely held. So again, especially health insurance, medical provisions, the health insurance abortion mandate exemption, almost every state has it. Sterilization mandate exemption, almost every state has it. So some items, very, very common. Other items, very few. So immunity from criminal prosecution when it comes to contraception, only 10%. Only one state, Mississippi, has explicit protections for-profit businesses not participating in practices that they have religious objections to. So that is just one state passed that. We're hoping that more states will pass that as they see that going on. So the items, just like with the states, there's a broad range in terms of how widely they've been adopted. If you think about like the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, the RFRAs, about half of the states, I think exactly half of the states have a RFRA and half don't. So there's all this variation in terms of safeguards, items, how prevalent they are. And this is really important when we communicate to, you think about your state, you can point to, well, how many states have religious liberty protections that your state doesn't, right? So we're writing op-eds to different states about, North Carolina or Ohio saying, hey, here's your score, and you don't have this protection that Illinois has and that Florida has. And you can kind of say, over half of the states have this protection, you don't. You should think about adding it, and you can go look at their legislation for how they've done it. So again, there's a lot of application here where we want this to be a tool for legislators and citizens to think about, okay, what does my state have? What do other states have? How common are some of these things? And use that as a tool of persuasion to think about how to protect religious liberty better.
And so that speaks to the methodology of the project too, in the sense that we didn't get a room full of experts or think ideally about what religious liberty protections would look like at the state level. We worked from the bottom up, inductively, you could say, well, what have states done? And then if they've done it, that provides an example for what other states could or could not do. And so in the case of that bottom item, like Mississippi's done it, it's an example. No other state has done it. Maybe it's a challenge in some way, or at least an opportunity for other states to think about protections that they could add. We've got just a couple minutes left, so I'm going to ask Mark and Paul maybe to weigh in about what's next, what we can look forward to now that the year 3 results are launched, and then moving in, this is going to continue to be an annual project that we continue to expand and update. And so what are some of the items maybe that you've considered, or what can we look forward to in future iterations of RLS?
So one of the things I'm most excited about, this has always been a very serious academic study with outside peer review and consultants and that sort of thing. And it's completely transparent. We make all of our data available. When you go to the website, you can download the entire data set. If you think we count something as religious liberty protection that shouldn't be counted, you could actually remove that. You could weight variables if you want. So it's completely transparent. One of the things we're really trying to ramp up, though, is to use this study to make a difference. As Paul already suggested, we've penned probably 8 or 9 op-eds that 2 have gone out today, and we're trying to get them placed in all sorts of states, encouraging states to pass additional legislation. We also put together for the first time a little pamphlet, Securing Religious Liberty in Your State, where we make suggestions. We point to some of the most important statutes that might be passed. And I think one thing that's particularly useful, and we've had legislators tell us this, they say, look, it would be real helpful if we had examples, if we had starting places, if we had laws from which we could model a statute for our state. And so we link to, we actually have text of various statutes that we're suggesting here. And then if you go to our website, you'll see live links to all of them. And so let's say you're from a state that might actually pass a law protecting places of public accommodations from being forced to participate in ceremonies against which their owners have religious objections. I'm thinking here of a Jack Phillips, right? Well, if you come from such a state, let's say Alabama, you might point a legislator or a state policy council member to the Mississippi law and say, you might look at this law and you might consider introducing something like that in the state of Alabama. So we make it as easy as possible. The other thing we're going to do is I'm going to personally write a letter to the head of 50 state policy organizations, and we're going to send them our executive report, which will be available, and it will be available to you on the way out. We'll send them a copy of the suggested legislation, and then we'll say, look, First Liberty attorneys, CRCD staff, Paul and I would be happy to chat with you about what your state might do to better protect religious liberty. And we've already had the opportunity to do that, some over the last 2 years. West Virginia legislator was very chagrined to see where his state fell. And so he contacted us and said, hey, what can we do to improve West Virginia's score? And of course, that's always nice. Americans are competitive. We want to be number one. But really, this is about protecting the ability of people to act according to the religious convictions whenever possible. And let me emphasize that we're concerned with all religious Americans, Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, and all sorts of minority religions. And some of the measures we have are much more likely to protect religious minorities than they are religious majorities.
Paul, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think I would just add to go back to something that Jordan said of a part of why this matters. So I'm actually a resident of Colorado, and there's a reason the Phillips Cake Shop is being litigated in Colorado and not in Illinois, for example. And being from Colorado, right, remembering the Republican majority and the evangelical presence there, it's sort of, kind of kicking myself. I wasn't really, I was 10 at the time, but kicking myself, right, that we didn't pass more of these protections back in the 90s and 2000s. It's very hostile in Colorado right now to religious liberty, and there's all kinds of problems that have emerged because of this changing political landscape. So we think that this work is important and something that we want even states that are friendly to religious liberty to be taking very seriously, be thinking about how to safeguard the future. The other thing I'll just say too is, and this is part of how we advocate and talk about the issues, is that we're trying to have a comprehensive index. So we're measuring everything that we can find that relates to religious liberty, but not all of them are made equal. Some of the statutes cover much broader protections than others. So some are very narrow, some are very broad. And again, part of why we make the data available for researchers, for other academics, is if they want to tweak and mess around with the weightings and say, hey, we want to weight this thing at 10 times because we think it's so important, or we want to weight this less, they can do that. We're making the judgments that we think are best to kind of give an accurate view of where the states fall. And especially as we're in the third year, going into the fourth year, we're going to have more interesting data about trends, right? Where states are moving up, where states are moving down. And so look forward to sharing results with you all in the future.
So there are states that are doing better, there are states that are doing worse. No state is perfect, and so every state has something that they can learn from another state, and there are things that every state can do to improve religious liberty protections in their context. The results for 2024 are now live at religiouslibertyinthestates.com, so you can go there, see how your state is doing. There's a scorecard for each state with all the 39 items listed, whether your state has it or doesn't. For those of you who are here physically with us, we've got those handouts Mark mentioned, so the small handout, Securing Religious Liberty in Your State, and then the report is also available. We're going to hand those out in the back. But if you're online, you can download those from religiouslibertyinthestates.com or at crcd.net. The Securing Religious Liberty in the States materials available there. Please do be in touch. Mark and Paul are going to be around all weekend. For those of you who are physically here, please talk to them about the project, and myself as well, any way we can help you. But the contact information for us is all available on the website too. We're eager for pushback or suggestions or questions about ways we can engage. Let me thank you all for joining us for this live stream, and for those of us who are here live. And we look forward